Hey, gorgeous. Welcome to the 5th season of the Hormone Puzzle Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kayla Smith, a holistic and integrative doctor specializing in fertility and hormone health. If you're looking for insights into hormones, fertility, and all things related, you've come to the right place. Tune in weekly as we record amazing experts in the field of women's health, breaking down those hormone walls, nerding out on nutrition, and having way too much fun. Whether you're beginning your journey or you've been struggling for years, we're going to finally put those pieces of your hormone puzzle back together so that you can get and stay pregnant if that's your goal, as well as eliminate all your hormone-related symptoms for good. Are you ready? This season, we're focusing closely on fertility and hormone health with an amazing lineup of expert guests sharing groundbreaking knowledge, bringing you stories and advice that will support you in your journey. We're here to lift your spirits, give you a virtual hug, inspiration, empower you, and we want you to take charge of your fertility and your health. Thank you all so much for tuning in and being amazing listeners. So now, let's get started on your road to transformation. Let's start putting those pieces of your hormone puzzle back together one step at a time. On today's show, we have Dr. Aumatma Simmons. She is a double board certified naturopathic doctor and endocrinologist in practice for close to 15 years. She specializes in fertility and is the best-selling author of 2 books, Fertility Secrets, What Your Doctor Didn't Tell You About Baby Making, and Infertility, Struggles, Secrets, and Successes. Dr. Aumatma is also the creator of Fertile Foundations, which is a supplement line of research-driven nutrients to support your fertility journey, and she's the host of Egg Meets Sperm podcast. In addition to supporting couples through individualized care in person and long distance, Dr. Aumatma also trains practitioners who want to specialize in fertility. Today, we're going to talk to Dr. Aumatma about, can you reverse your ovarian age? So now let's welcome Dr. Aumatma to the podcast. Hey, Dr. Aumatma, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Kayla. It's nice to be here. I should say doctor.
Oh, Kayla. Yes. There you go. I love it. I love it. Well, yeah, we were talking offline. I can't believe we've never had you on because you've been a part of our summits and you're just a wealth of information. And I know our audience just loves you. And so I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So tell everybody listening who doesn't know, tell us who you are and how you got into the work that you're doing and what makes you so passionate about this work and this mission.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I say this in different ways every time I get asked, but I really I got into this because I was married to this person who wanted to have children, and I just couldn't see myself doing that. And every time he would say babies, my uterus would be like, no. And I was like, oh, okay, that's very clear. What's happening? And like, I just had to figure out, because what I learned in medical school, similar to what almost everybody still learns, is our fertility drops off of a cliff at 35. So that's what I had going in the background. And I was like, if I don't have children with him, where does that leave me is it in terms of like having a family or a child ever? And it really set me into a tailspin for quite some time. I buried myself in research for like 9 months. And I essentially came out of that with like, we've been majorly lied to. Like, there is no drop off. It's not a cliff. It's a slow, steady decline. And there is just so much misinformation about our fertility, about hormones. So I really fell into it because of that story that kind of sent me into the tailspin of research and really like following all the breadcrumbs and being like, oh my God, this is like so different from what I learned. And why don't we know the reality? And why don't we know the truth? And like every time I talk about it, I'm still like gung ho that women should have this information. So I'm here for as long as that feels alive, right? Like until I feel like I've made a dent in this rhetoric that we have in our world, and until women feel truly empowered to be themselves and live the lives that we were here to live, that we were born to live, and not be limited by what society is telling us we can and can't do.
Sure. I love that. And it's so refreshing to hear from another doctor that feels the same I feel, and how many of the practitioners that I have on this show that it doesn't fall off a cliff at 35. You can change the trajectory of your fertility age and optimize your eggs and get pregnant well into your 40s. I mean, I see it in practice every day, and I'm sure you do too. So I love that you say that. It's so refreshing. And I love every time you tell that story. I just think it's so cool because you had the wherewithal to say that to yourself, and to look at you now and your life, and you have a child, and it's just a beautiful journey. So I love that story, and thank you for sharing it. And let's dive in. Yeah, definitely. Let's dive into that piece of, that topic for today. Can we reverse our ovarian age? So let's kind of start there and just basics. Talk to us about what is our ovarian age versus our chronological age.
Yeah. So ovarian age, as well as our cellular age, if we want to call it that, comes out of the idea that our body and the cells in our body are aging either more or less rapidly than what would be normal, quote unquote, for a year of aging. So every birthday, we're like, oh my God, I'm a year older. But the reality is maybe you are, maybe you aren't. How are you going to know? So, and I did this recently on myself, actually. There's a way to calculate your phenotypic age, which is the other type of age. I'm physically 44. My phenotypic age is 34. So I went through that and was like, oh my God, like I'm good. I can have children tomorrow if I want to, right? Like on some level, that aging really has to do with our exposures to toxins and the interplay of our environment and our genes, which is epigenetics, right? So how well we're aging, or how slowly we are aging, is a direct reflection of what are we being exposed to and how is our body responding to that. In my opinion, absolutely. Like we should be able to reverse ovarian age or phenotypic age, because that is very much in our control. It's very much just what I said, like it's the interaction between the environment and our genes. So if we can't change our genes, but we can change the expression of those genes, that's epigenetics, through things like nutrigenomics or nutrients, cellular function, mitochondrial function, and all of those play a huge role in whether or not we're able to get pregnant, how easily we're able to get pregnant, as well as like how close we are to menopause, right? Mm-hmm. It's all of that is determining where our hormones are going and what our body thinks is happening inside of our body, instead of, oh, it's my birthday, so here I am.
For sure. And I love that too, that you mentioned that it's not just, obviously we're trying to work on fertility and we're talking about that here, but when we start to reverse our cellular aging and we work on our longevity, it's not just affecting our fertility, but how close we are to menopause, how we age, how healthy we are as we age, because cellular rejuvenation is going to help us to be healthy for the rest of our life. So I love that you say that, and so important. And talk to us a little more about, we talked a little bit about toxins. Is there anything else that can contribute to advanced aging, where we're aging rapidly and that, that it's affecting our fertility rapidly?
Well, toxins is such a big arena, right? I feel like toxins is almost everything that we're exposed to. It's everything from internal toxins, like I feel some kind of way about my stepmother and the emotions that that's generating is affecting my genetic function. So we can think about, if we expand our definition of what we think of when we say toxins, then literally everything that we're exposed to can either be a toxin or pro-health. The things that are pro-health are the things that potentially we are consciously or unconsciously doing, like the food that we eat. I choose to eat organic as often as possible. I have a water filter. I have an air filter, right? Like the things that we're doing to try and promote our well-being are the things that are potentially like trying to balance out or even out the exposures that we have in our environment. And I like, more and more I'm coming to this place of like, and the internal toxins probably matter a huge amount. And if we're not doing the work on ourselves to release those emotions, to release those internal toxins, then they're also affecting our well-being. And
Sure.
then I think things like nutrient deficiencies, which sounds really basic, but if our cells don't have the nutrients that they need to function, or potentially like our liver is not clearing out the stuff that it should be clearing out because it's missing some amino acid, or it's missing glutathione, it's not doing the steps that it needs to get the garbage out. That's also an increased burden on our bodies. So I feel like all of it on some level is playing a role in this fine balance of our state of health.
I completely agree. And I love that you mentioned it's not just the physical pieces, obviously the nutrient deficiencies and the toxin exposure and doing what we need to filter as much as we can. All of that's important. But I love too that you mentioned the internal piece, because I feel like that's not talked about enough. And it's so important. Do you have a mindset of I can't, or do you have, any old trauma or old
I'm
wounds that
too
are,
old.
I'm too
And it's
old.
like in the
Yeah,
fertility world, I feel like doctors promote that stuff,
right?
right? So I'm too old. My ovaries are too old. My eggs are too old. This is never going to work out. Like all of these belief systems that are being created either out of our own insecurities or insecurities imposed upon us by the medical paradigm.
Sure.
And we really have to question those things, because that stuff is super toxic, right? I just talked to one of our 43-year-olds who, like, she's amazing, right? Like her hormones are amazing. Her, like, all of the things are really, really good now. And they had a pregnancy loss after doing all the work. We were a little surprised and a little heartbroken, but we're like, you know what? It's okay. Like, we're gonna figure this out. And it turns out she had an autoimmune condition that is like barely detectable.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, that sucks.
Mm.
And she's like, well, does it make sense? Like, should I go to the IVF clinic just to see what they have to say? I'm like, cool, I support that. Let's do it. She goes to the doctor. He's like, oh, well, you're having pregnancy losses because you're too old. And I was like, that is not the reason. Did you show him the blood work? And she's like, yeah. He looked at it. He said, no, that's not the issue. It's the fact that I'm 43. That's what's causing the pregnancy losses. And I was just like, oh my God, please just filter that out. Like, we've done so much work on it. She's like, I know, I'm not listening to him, but it did break my heart a little bit.
Oh, and I feel that too. And I hate when that happens. And another piece of this that I really wanted to mention, I have a lot of people that'll come and they are their diagnosis. You're told you have PCOS or you have a thyroid, you have hypothyroidism or whatever your condition is. And it's almost
Yeah.
like you become that condition. And then that's a mental block for why your body's not progressing in natural treatments. And so
Yeah.
I hate that. And I hate that when doctors do that with age and diagnose.
Yeah.
Don't listen. You're listening to this show. There's always a
Don't
way.
hit
Yeah.
the ignore button on that part. It's everything else is fine, but let's just hit pause on the whole like It's your age. Nothing else matters.
Exactly. Now, one other piece I hear a lot with age, AMH, people always come in saying, AMH is this, so my doctor says I need to use donor eggs, or, I'm not able to get pregnant. And so talk to us about that. First, just briefly, what is AMH? And I know the answer to this, but for the audience, is it the main factor in being able to get pregnant, in your 40s plus?
Yeah, so I have a very interesting definition around AMH, which I learned from another fertility specialist in Australia. And she basically describes it in the best way that I can make sense of this. So it's anti-Müllerian hormone. It's essentially a dam that holds off all of your eggs from simultaneously developing when you're exposed to follicle stimulating hormone, right? So we have the stimulus of follicle stimulating hormone that says, time to make some eggs, time to grow them eggs so that we can ovulate, right? And AMH is the force or the dam against that so that you don't have a flood. Right. So as soon as I heard this, I was like, oh, it all makes sense now. Right. So if you have a really high signal of FSH, which means your brain is screaming for your ovaries to make follicles, and there is no friction, there's no AMH. It's basically like any follicles that are there are welcome to develop. They're probably not developing because the brain is kind of yelling too loudly. But those follicles, there's no dam. There's nothing holding it from developing. In the case of women that have PCOS, I'm just going to flip to the opposite for a second. If you have a very high AMH, 6, 7, I've seen all the way up to 46, that dam is so strong that those follicles are not developing, which is why they don't ovulate, right? So you got to have the dam low enough to let the water through, but high enough to let everything through simultaneously.
Yeah.
So when AMH is really, really low, and really low is relative. So low ovarian reserve, quote unquote, is basically below, if your AMH is below 1, in the US, these are US units, then you're going to be told that you have low ovarian reserve. Usually that's paired with a high FSH. So FSH is above 10, AMH is below 1. That's usually not so great news. And that AMH value came out of the IVF world that noticed that when AMH was below 1.06, people were not getting pregnant as easily with IVF. The reason for that is essentially IVF is based on how many eggs can we retrieve, and the more eggs we can retrieve, the better our chances are of being able to conceive or being able to turn those eggs into embryos. It's all a numbers game, right? So the higher your bet, the better your chances. As simple as that. So in our case, though, it's not dependent on how many eggs. So what I have seen is that we can't think of AMH or ovarian reserve as a one determining factor. It's a multifactorial thing. So if someone has an AMH at 43, her AMH is 0.2. The chances of that person, and her FSH is high, let's say it's 15, then her chances are going to be a lot lower than the same AMH in a 32-year-old. And I believe the reason is that when there are younger women with these very low ovarian reserves, something else is going on. Versus when you're in your 40s and your AMH is low, it's unfortunately your body's likely moved through the majority of eggs that are available. And I don't want to like discourage people, because you could have, even at 43, we have seen an AMH woman of 0.2 get pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that it will never happen for you. I'm just saying that the chances are statistically lower for the same exact AMH in a 32-year-old versus a 42-year-old, or 33 and 43, whatever. So it's really, we have to think about it in the context of who this person is. What is their AMH doing, right? Like the woman that we have, a 32-year-old whose AMH was 0.1 when she came to us. She was told she needed donor eggs. And I looked at her hormones, and her FSH was 1.9.
Wow.
So here, like in my brain, I'm thinking,
Where
this
is
is not low ovarian reserve at all. This has nothing to do with ovarian reserve. And she was like, really? Like, I've talked to 6 different doctors and they all said the same thing. And I was like, well, you can believe them, or you can try
Right.
us. Like, I don't have any other options.
Yeah.
And she ended up trying out the program. She, like, massive transformation. She was bleeding like 1 day a month, and had a 29-day cycle, 1 bleeding day, and it was like very scanty. And I was like, yeah, that's not a healthy period. It's not going to happen. And by the end of it, her AMH didn't change at all. No change, right? So I looked at those and I was like, damn it, really? How is this possible? Right? And then literally that cycle, she got pregnant. And I was like, oh, well, it didn't matter that her AMH didn't change at all. Like, makes no difference. So it really is like, I think that AMH, if we're thinking about it as the dam effect, and you're just like, this is the dam. The body creates as strong of a dam as is needed to keep all of your follicles from developing at once. And it's body's innate wisdom to determine how strong that dam needs to be. Our job is not to worry about the dam. Our job is to worry about, how's the flow of the water, right? Is there water to flow? Is the quality of that water good? So if we worry about all of the other things, that dam becomes less relevant. And what I've seen especially with PCOS women who have that really strong dam, their numbers, their AMH will drop drastically. They're like, oh my God, you're disappearing all my eggs. Like, no, I'm not. You only have the number of eggs you have. I'm not changing that number at all. Yeah. What's happening is that dam is getting not so strong that now follicles can actually develop like they should, and you get to the goal that you want, which is healthy ovulation, healthy fertilization. So it's the conversation around AMH, sorry, it like took forever, but it really is like so nuanced. And the number of women that are 47, 48, 49, 50, like I've seen it all, 47 and up, all the way up to 55.
Wow.
And they are often messaging me like, my AMH is 0.05. Can I still get pregnant? And I'm like, what is your FSH? Let's start there. But it's really unlikely, right? Like, the chances of this happening are really low, because already, like, your body has reduced that dam because there isn't a opposing force that it needs to keep the dam strong for. So like, when that is related to age, it makes sense. When it's not, that's the part that I get super excited about, because there's a lot of under 35-year-olds with this very low ovarian reserve. And most of the time I'm like, oh, it's something else. Like, you have an autoimmune thing going on. You have your FSH, like the low FSH thing. I pretty much in my mind was like, this woman has RED, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome, when her FSH and LH are so low. And she was certainly not eating adequate levels of protein. It was completely like That's literally her biggest change was eat protein. Let's get you some protein. And she was like, really? This is going to work?
I love that. And I love that, you gave such a wonderful explanation of AMH. I love that you say it's not the main factor. And I love the dam analogy. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that really is a good point of, if you're 35 and under and you have low AMH, let's ask the question, well, why is this happening? Because this is not normal. If it is age related and you're 40 plus and you have low AMH, then let's see, okay, were you past the point of us being able to work on that? Are you 45 plus? Or are you 40 to 45? Is there something else going on here? Is there other things that we can do to improve, not just AMH, but overall fertility so that you
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like that 35 to 42 range, I find that a lot of them have this, like, it's the AMH is below 1.06, but it's well above 0.2.
Right.
And that gray zone is amazing. I'm like, bring me all the gray zone.
Yes.
Please bring me all the gray zone, because it's like they don't not have eggs. They have eggs.
Yeah.
The signal, that dam is like starting to weaken, but so what? Like, that's irrelevant to me as long as we have some eggs to work with and we get all of the other signals right. It's magic. Like, none of those women should have issues getting pregnant.
I love that. And I completely agree. And that's what I see in my practice too. And another thing I wanted to mention too, I see a lot of women that are 35 and under coming in and saying they've been diagnosed with premature ovarian failure, premature ovarian insufficiency.
Yeah.
Do you see that as well? And I'm always asking
them,
what is causing that? That's not normal to have that. Let's figure out why that's happening in the first place. So talk to us about that. Do you see that?
Yeah, we see it a lot. What's interesting about a lot of those women is statistically your AMH isn't really accurate till 35. So a lot of women get their AMH tested and are like, oh my God, it's so low. Yes, we should be concerned about it. But again, we should be looking at what else is happening in the body. And I find that more and more we are seeing autoimmune conditions popping up a lot. There's mold, which is also going to have a huge impact on fertility. There are, of course, like exorbitant amount of toxins that we're putting on and in our bodies. That is going to have an impact on AMH specifically. There are a lot of like PFAs and phthalates, things like that, that have a direct impact on lowering AMH. So I think that this, like, oh, I have low ovarian reserve, and we're basing it on one number without the context, without any other testing. And what I have understood, I've talked to a lot of reproductive endocrinologists, and there was only one so far that has made a lot of sense. And he said, it's almost like when you have an environment that is not optimal, and he was talking about physical environment, but I think this applies even more when we have trauma, stress, but like specific types of emotional stress, our ovaries shut off. And what he said was, it's almost like these follicles that you have go to sleep, and all the stuff that y'all do, you naturopathic doctors do, helps to wake those follicles back up, which is why very often we've seen AMH go up. And it's like, well, what explains that? And I've always tried to like wrap my head around what's happening. How do we get an increase in AMH? And his theory is that there are follicles that went into a sleep state because it was not safe, essentially. And as soon as you get that environment right, those follicles wake back up. And hence you need a stronger dam to hold them back from fertilizing or developing in order to fertilize. So
I've said something similar too. I always say that they're lying dormant, and that we just have to do things to wake them up and give them a clean environment so that they can flourish. gosh. So I
Yes,
love that. I'm going to have to remember that to go to
exactly.
sleep. Love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. And I love this conversation. I knew that we would have such a fun time talking, but we do have to take a break. So we're going to do that now. We're going to hear a word from our sponsors. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more practical tips. What can we do with nutrition? What can we do with supplements? All of that and more when we come back. Hey, all. It's Dr. Kayla here. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. We'll be back in just a moment. But first, let me share something exciting that I know will make a difference in your fertility puzzle. Hey, lovely listeners. Don't miss the upcoming free Solving Infertility Summit. It's a gathering of top women's health experts from around the globe, all sharing their insights on fertility and hormone health. Visit www.solving-infertility.com to register. I hope you'll join us for this incredible event. The details of this event are in the show notes, so you can easily find them after this podcast. Now, let's jump back into our episode and continue our hormone puzzle journey together. Hey, Dr. Aumatma, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. We're back.
Yes, we're back. And I love this half of the show because it's all about practical tips that people can take and do right now. So let's talk about that. I know we talked a little bit about some things in the beginning, but what are maybe your top 5 things that you tell your patients to do to start to optimize their fertility when we're thinking about eggs, AMH, overall fertility health? What would you say?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest ones is getting the right quality of nutrients. So from food, let's just start with food first.
Yeah.
So eating a variety of foods. I feel like there's always a trend of like this diet and that diet and that diet and that diet. And almost all diets are designed to restrict food groups. That's what the basis of a diet is. What are you eliminating?
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to hormones and AMH in particular, making sure that you have high quality nutrients of all varieties. So you're getting adequate protein, adequate vegetables, right?
Mhm.
That's like 7 to 8 servings a day, y'all. It's a lot of vegetables. And then adequate fats and complex carbohydrates. And it's always the carbs that trip people up. They're like, what? She's telling me to eat carbs. I've been no carb for so long. But you have to eat good, healthy, wholesome, complex carbohydrates in order for your body to produce hormones, specifically progesterone. But if you cut out carbs, you're not getting enough calories. Like there's no way you're getting adequate calories. So it's really, really important. So I think that's a really important first step is protein, vegetables, complex carbohydrates, and healthy fats. Choose whatever diet you want. I don't really care. You want to be vegan, you want to eat meat. I don't give a crap which one it is. Just make sure you're getting all the different food varieties.
Yes. And make sure you're eating enough. I love that you say that. I see so many people, whether they're cutting food groups or not, they're just not eating enough and they're fasting and they're going, many hours a day. And it's like, just eat some food. Yeah.
Don't intermittent fast. Do not do that to your body. I see so many women that are like, oh, I've been intermittent fasting for 3 years and I'm still not getting pregnant. I'm like, did I just tell you to cut out intermittent fasting and you'll probably get pregnant?
Right.
It's that simple. So, and granted, intermittent fasting, there's a specific use case in fertility context, which might be for PCOS. And even that, I don't love it. I think there are other ways you can do that better.
Yes.
But in that case, you may have an exception. But it needs to be individualized to each person. So that'll be number one. The second around food specifically is to take away the things that are potentially inflammatory for your body. And there are 2 ways that you can determine if something is inflammatory for your body. One is you can do like a a detox diet or like get rid of all of the potentially inflammatory foods and then add it back in to see which one has a reaction. That is my less preferred way because it takes forever. I'm like, we ain't got no time for this. So I prefer to just do a test so that we know if there are foods that are inflammatory for you. And granted, that test is kind of pricey. So I think of it specifically in the cases of premature ovarian insufficiency, autoimmune conditions, women that have low AMH, but it doesn't make any sense. Those are all the points at which we really want to ensure that your body is not going through some sort of inflammatory reaction that we can't see. So those are, yeah.
And I was just going to say, do you recommend gut testing first or food sensitivity testing?
I go straight to the food sensitivity testing. I think that there's a place for things like stool tests or GI maps or things like that. I have found workarounds. Like I just interpret the food sensitivity test with all of that in mind. It's not the most accurate, but I think of testing as like, is this going to make a difference in our strategy or is it confirmation? And confirmation is good, but I want the stuff that's going to make a difference in our strategy. So if we're going to spend $500, I would rather it be like telling us exactly what we need to do rather than like, yeah, we have this nebulous idea of what's happening in your gut and we still need to know what foods are causing that problem to begin with. So, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so we have those two. The third is water intake. And water is like, it's kind of the nourishment for your ovaries and the eggs, the follicles in your ovaries. So if you're dehydrated chronically, which how many of us are dehydrated?
Yes.
Myself included.
Myself included.
Right. Like, I don't feel like any of us get adequate levels of water, but really optimizing it for your body is going to make it or break it for the hormones as well as the blood that needs to flow and nourish the follicles. So that's a must.
Yes.
Ideally, it's clean water. Ideally, you're not using plastic water bottles. Ideally, it's filtered, right? Like all of those things are A+. But if you can do none of it, you still got to drink the water. So that's number 3 for me. 4, I would say, is probably sleep and really optimizing the cortisol melatonin patterns or the sleep-wake cycles is going to create the template for what's happening in your ovaries. So if for example, if your cortisol is too low, which like we don't talk about enough, but see all the freaking time, I'm sure, is like your body is in a state of survival. If you don't have adequate cortisol, your body is constantly like, how do I survive? What do I need? How do I get energy? Like that level of survival is not going to support fertility in any way. So if your body is in survival mode, you on either extreme, too low cortisol or too high cortisol, your body is giving off signals of this is not a safe time to reproduce and essentially turns off the ovaries. Like, we don't need the ovaries. Let's shut that down because it is not essential to my survival in this moment. So that's really important. But the second part of that is the melatonin. And when we have adequate melatonin produced in our own bodies, I prefer that first to like what we can supplement. The supplements are good, but ideally we're producing it ourselves. And that melatonin is essentially the most potent antioxidant for our ovaries. and testicles, honestly. But like it is the best antioxidant to support your fertility. So why we don't talk about it, why we're focused on things like CoQ10 and DHEA and all the other things is it's a surprise to me. I'm like, well, all of it is either your melatonin is supporting your fertility or you don't have adequate levels and you don't actually ever get the rejuvenative action of melatonin in your body. So any imbalances in sleep or wake. So signs of that is like you don't have enough energy. You feel like you crash midday. You can't get to bed at night, or you lay your head down and you're out like a light. All of those, you wake up in the middle of the night. You wake up feeling not rested. You hit your snooze button 500 times. All of those are little signs or indicators that something is out of whack with this sleep-wake cycle. And it's relatively easy to fix. It's like, well, I shouldn't say that. There are lots of people that struggle with insomnia, which is a whole different level. But if you're just like one of those, like, I don't ever feel rested, I'm just exhausted all the time, the way to fix it is start with the sleep cycle, because that's going to be the first step. So you can turn off the screen, make sure you're sleeping in darkness, right? Like the basics. I'm sure you've talked about this a million times. So do the things that help you get more restful night's sleep. You can do like trackers like Aura or something like that that can help you figure out like why you're not sleeping or when you're waking up. Blood sugar balance alongside of that sleep wake cycle is playing a role for sure. Quick story, I was doing a CGM recently, and I was really shocked actually that my cortisol spikes like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was literally or like an hour after that, I would feel really exhausted. And I was like, what the hell is happening? And as soon as I put the CGM on, I was like, well, I know what's happening. Like, I am spiking blood sugar so basically my cortisol is spiking my blood sugar because I didn't eat lunch. So every day I'm skipping lunch. And like, yeah, I know, terrible. I just don't have the time. I'm like,
I know. Sometimes you're not the best patients.
No, definitely not. Do not do what I do. Don't do what I do. Do what I say.
Exactly.
No, but like as soon as I put those pieces together, I was like, okay, I really have to figure out how I can put in a meal. Like I'm not actually hungry ever, right? Like I'm not ever hungry in the middle of the day. Like I'm good. I'm not going to be hungry till 4. But I was having these blood sugar spikes way before 4 o'clock. Yeah. So I like really monitoring things like Aura or CGMs or things like that can help you kind of tailor and figure out like what is happening that is creating this physiology in my body and how can I fix it.
I love that. And I love CGMs. I think they're so valuable and such great information. And like you said, sometimes it's just a little tweak here and there. It doesn't have to be this huge shift. For you, it was just adding in a little lunch, maybe a snack. It wasn't a huge, but it's something valuable. Yeah.
Just gotta get the blood sugar up and then you're good. So yeah, doing things like that. And then the morning part, I think probably the most essential part in the morning is to make sure we're getting sunlight first thing in the morning. So if you live, and I find this a lot, like if you live in a place that doesn't get sun in the morning, Portland, Seattle, Houston, sometimes you really need to have resources in your home or environment that can substitute. So full spectrum light bulbs, it really needs to shine down onto your eyes instead of like straight face to face or face on. which is like stimulating different parts of the brain. So as long as you have a light that's shining down, or you like prop it up on something and it goes down onto your eyes, that's good enough. So those I think are key. I would say the key foundations for supporting people with fertility, and especially with low ovarian reserve.
I love that. It's amazing. And I completely agree. And it's all kind of pieces we've touched on, but I love that you kind of put it all together. Definitely agree. The sleep piece is so valuable. The nutrition, the circadian rhythm, all of it, it plays a big role. Thank you for explaining all of that. And I could just talk to you all day long, but we do have to start to wrap up. So we have a few things to do before we do that. So first, I just want to tell you thank you so much. I always just love our conversations, and you're just such a gift to our audience. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. And then, so before we go, a couple things. First, I just want to play a little game so our audience can get to know you personally. Would you like to play?
Sure.
Okay, so how it works, I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. You're going to say the first thing that comes to your mind. All right, ready? Okay. Favorite food?
Pizza.
Least favorite food?
Eggplant.
Favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, Tulum.
Oh, bucket list item.
I like living my bucket list life.
Yeah, there you go. Favorite book?
Right now, it is Superhuman by Dr. Joe Dispenza.
I love it. That's one of my favorites. And where will you be in 5 years?
Hopefully retired. No, I'm kidding.
Right in Tulum.
I'm living my bucket list life in Tulum. No, I mean, in a lot of things, I think that in some ways, I would have, in the next 5 years, like to have impacted 500,000 people with the empowerment message around fertility and our hormones.
I love that. It's amazing. Well, Dr. Aumatma, it's always so fun to have you. Where can people find you and learn more about working with you?
Instagram is the best place, at Holistic Fertility Doctor. Feel free to message me there. And I have a podcast, so it's called Egg Meets Sperm. So that's another great place to connect.
And you have 2 amazing books. So tell us briefly about the book.
Thank you. My first book was Fertility Secrets, What Your Doctor Didn't Tell You About Baby Making. And it gets into all of my thought process and how we do fertility and what you can do for yourself. People have messaged me and said they got pregnant after following the steps in the book. So yes, that's a really great starting point. And then infertility, I always forget the second part of it, so we'll link it.
I said it in your bio, so listen to bio.
Yeah. And that one is more of a collaboration with a bunch of different providers, but it has some really powerful stories of hope and just like what is possible outside of when you pause and like take a step back and think about things differently.
I love that. And that one is called Infertility, Struggles, Secrets, and Successes. So,
I was like, I know secrets is in there again.
yes. Perfect. And you have a free gift for us too. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So my favorite gift for people to have is our infertility blueprint. And it's essentially like why we don't look at root causes. What are all of the potential root causes and how to like navigate it all, and the testing that you can use alongside of it to really like understand your fertility deeper than being told everything is fine or everything is normal, which is like my biggest pet peeve. It's like, if you're not getting pregnant, everything's not normal. So let's figure out what is happening.
Amazing. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your generosity and for that free gift. Any final thoughts? What do you want to say to the audience before we close out?
I want you guys, for whoever is listening to this, if you are struggling with fertility, you can spend all of your time, energy, and resources trying to figure this out for yourself. But you will save yourself time, energy, and heartache in finding someone that can support you instead. It's like, I should never be my own doctor. I realize that, right? Like, I should not be treating myself. And like, I shouldn't be coaching myself. And I don't, right? Like, if I want to achieve a goal, or if I have set my mind to something, I don't ask, how am I going to get there? My question is, who is going to be on this team so that I can get there? So I really encourage people to think about fertility differently, because I think our world is so one-sided. It's like, oh, I only want to get fertility support if I'm doing IVF. And I'm like, well, that doesn't actually make sense, because you've already done that path. Now what? So really, like, find the team of people that is going to be around you, that are going to keep your head right and support your mind, body, and spirit to heal, so that you can have the family you want. And you don't want to start that family 5 years from now. You want it now. So get the support now.
Yes, I love that. And I completely agree. And I love when you say that. So thank you for that. And thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you to everybody who's listening to this episode of the Hormone Puzzle Podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Hey, hang on a second. Before you go, I've got some fantastic free resources waiting for you over at our website,
all designed to support your journey. When I was going through my own 2 years of infertility, I wish that there had been something like this to guide me. There just wasn't. And that's why I created these resources specifically for you. And here's a little secret. The strategies and the foods that I share in these resources are the exact same ones that helped me conceive, not once, but twice, even after being told that it wasn't possible. So trust me, I know these tools work. Make sure you check them out. And I can't wait for you to be my next success story. Thank you so much for joining me today. And don't forget to check the show notes of this episode. If you enjoyed our time together, please hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. This would mean so much to me, and it's how more people just like you can find our show. See you next week on the Hormone Puzzle Podcast.